Welcome to the Jeremy podcast, where we take a deep dive into different educational topics to help you optimize your life. Today, we are going to be talking about metabolic syndrome. I am Jeremy, your host. I'm here today with my partner in crime inside the First Form app, Mr. Montae Kaufman.
Good morning, sir.
How you been?
I've been good.
Not that I haven't talked to you, we just haven't talked in this fashion in a few weeks.
It has been a few weeks. I had some doctor's appointments, and I think, were you traveling?
Was traveling a little bit, and then Reno was actually off doing a reclass in the military. So we're a little slow on getting things edited and put out because my, for lack of better words, or using the same words, partner in crime on the podcast who does all the editing because that is his skill set is a little busy. So we just haven't felt the need to push a bunch of a product out if we're going to be a little slow editing it anyway. So.
I'm gonna have to get on Reno and have him step his
Yeah.
game up.
I mean, he's got his evenings. We need to pressure him. Be like, you listen, you can get
We
it
all
done.
got stuff going on. We still got to get things done.
Correct. He should have. I mean, he's like, my wife tells me when I'm away to school, it's a vacation anyway, right? So, he's on vacation.
Yeah.
So, but hey, metabolic syndrome, we're going to define it. We're going to talk about, how it is diagnosed or what are the symptoms that come along with it. It's generally out of five things. If you have three of them, you can be diagnosed with it. But it's more of a combination of symptoms that lead to, I hate to even call it a diagnosis, right? Um, but the reason we're doing this, and we're talking on our team call later today to our group, because I feel like I've got, a handful, maybe up to a dozen people who are doing well. They're tracking their nutrition, they're hitting their protein and calories like we preach to them, like we talk to them, they're consistent with it. They're, getting walks in most days, they're hitting at least 3 days of resistance training. So, like on paper, everything is looking pretty good, right? But we're not seeing the results. But when I go in and I look at the progress photos, I look at how they're built, and I'm starting to ask for some blood work, and the blood work I have gotten in, I'm seeing the numbers, and it kind of comes to me like, okay, we need to have this conversation with some individuals to where, okay, now we need to really focus on that ratio of the carbs and fats and maybe take a little bit lower approach on the carbohydrate because I think there's some insulin resistance there. I think there's some metabolic syndrome going on to produce results in people. So we thought it'd be good to, hey, let's describe what is metabolic syndrome, what are the symptoms that you can look for. And before we do that, I would say that, hey, if you're 40, 50, 60 pounds overweight, life just happened to you over the last 5, 10 years. And once again, I know we just don't wake up in this situation, but when I say wake up is there's been other things that you've been concentrating on. And here you are, you need to lose weight. You carry your weight in your midsection, you got 60 pounds to lose. I would venture to say you've got some insulin resistance or probably some of these metabolic or enough of these symptoms to have a metabolic syndrome. And a lower carb approach may be great starting out for you to help alleviate these symptoms that you do have. So it's kind
I
of
love
like
how you said starting out. A lot of people get scared on that, thinking they have to do it forever. And I know there's a couple of things, PCOS and stuff, where you have to do it like that is your lifestyle, but it's not a forever thing.
yeah. And I haven't spoken on this in a while, but that's how like early on in my career, when I started coaching, working with people one-on-one. So not necessarily a career like working in the hospital setting or something like that, but actually coaching people on diet macros, I got labeled as a low carb guy, right? So everybody like, oh, you go work with Jeremy, he's gonna put you on low carb. It wasn't that I put everybody on low carbohydrate. It was that because the pocket of people, the culture of people that I was working with, most of them were overweight, didn't work out a lot, and had insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. So how we correct that is by lowering carbohydrate inside of the diet, from that standpoint. So I think that's, once again, and we see this in social media and we see this within the nutrition community. It's like ebb and flow. And I think in the past really 4 or 5 years, it's gotten away from like, hey, you don't have to do low carb diet to have results, and you don't. But I feel like there are some people, especially if we have metabolic damage that is occurring, that a lower carb approach can work really, really well.
Agree. I mean,
So
I took that approach in mind, and then now, we've moved up to where I can eat 300, 400 grams of carbs.
yeah. And I would say, hey, for most people, and once again, it's a generic term, but if you're overweight, right, and you're not exercising a lot, lower carb is a good way to go. And once again, it's a relative term because what's low for one person may not be low for the next. right? So I guess if we say lower carb, I don't want to put some definitions on it. I would say lower carb is going to be something less than 100 grams of carbs a day. Because I would argue, hey, if we're middle aged and we're only working out 3 or 4 days a week, as far as working out with some intensity, you don't need more than 150 grams of carbs in your diet because you're just not using them. Because remember, the ultimate goal of having more carbohydrate in the diet is that carbohydrate is your primary fuel source for higher intensity activity. So I think a lot of people just get, misunderstood by some stuff that's out in social media and some of the influencers when it comes to fitness, because these people are training a lot versus the average person isn't getting a lot of training in, and you just don't need a lot of carbohydrate.
Right.
And you can work in 150 grams of carbs a day. You can still work in a bunch of fruits, a bunch of veggies, and probably one serving of starch a day. And I would say that 150 grams of carbs a day can fuel almost any training that's an hour and less if you're only doing 1 hour of training per day. So once again, my take, my opinion, my podcast, I can have it, right? But hey, let's dive into the definition. So I think a lot of people have probably heard the term metabolic syndrome, but what is it, right? What is it not? I think those are some things that we want to kind of clear up today. So metabolic syndrome is not actually a disease or a diagnosis, right? It is more of like, think of it as a cluster of symptoms that's going to increase the risk for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, stroke, and a lot of other chronic conditions. So I think that's the best way to look at it is when we say you could have metabolic syndrome, it is more of you've got symptoms of some things going on that's going to increase your risk for these issues later on. Okay. And once again, I'm going to bring this number up and I'm going to continue bringing it up because it's something I wanted to harp on. But like the latest stats on teenagers, is that 1 out of 3 teenagers are insulin resistant, like 33% already. So if we don't fix this, if we don't, as adults lead by the front and educate ourselves and then educate our kids, we're going to run into a really big problem in a decade from now with a lot of young adults type 2 diabetes. And this is going to put a strain, I think, on, insurance companies financially, on individuals from paying insurance, because it is just, it is a big problem that is out there, right? So something that we just want to kind of keep in the back of our mind, especially those that are listening to the podcast that are more wellness based, from coaches to individuals. Okay. There's going to be 5 factors that, are quote symptoms that are included. And I'll probably add one that is not included in most of the data that's out there. Montae, you and I can just kind of bounce back and forth between these as we go through them. And technically, you should have 3 of these risk factors out of the 5 to be quote unquote, once again, labeled as metabolic syndrome. But I would argue, even if one of these is high, then it's something that we need to address. And it wouldn't hurt doing a lower carb plan, maybe for 8 weeks, to address, once again, just that one thing that is elevated or that is abnormal. Okay. So, first and foremost, I mentioned this a couple of times, but carrying your weight in your midsection. Okay. And I'm not talking about like, hey, you're 12% body fat and you just carry it in your midsection, you're super lean in other places. That's what I'm talking about here. Okay. The data will have it at, greater than 40 inches for men and greater than 34 inches for female. So, okay, doing a waist circumference, I would say, inch below your belly button, as far as your waist goes. Not necessarily your waist in jeans, because I know some people like to wear their jeans a little bit lower, you know, right around the hips. So we're not talking about the circumference there. So I would say right below your belly button, that's where you'd want to measure at. And once again, if you're over 40 inches for guys and over 34 for ladies, that is going to be one of those risk factors that we would want to work on, right? So that is our first one that we would look at.
All right, so I'll go the high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a sign that there could be some metabolic syndrome there.
Yeah, and I think they label elevated blood pressure as something like 130 over 80 or 85, right? But once again, even if you had a slightly elevated, blood pressure, 125, over 85, I would still like kind of look at it and be like, okay, let's focus on this. What can we do? And if you're healthy weight, it may not have anything to do with dropping body fat, but it could be how are we handling our stress, right? So there's some things to look at. So, once again, kind of as we always round this out, one, body fat around the midsection. 2, elevated blood pressure. I'll go with elevated blood glucose levels, right? So we talk about, insulin resistance, we talk about pre-diabetes, but elevated blood glucose levels. And this is where I'm going to add one other marker in. Okay, so we got elevated fasting blood glucose, so anything over 100. But I would also argue if it's like you're flirting with 100, so it's 97, 98, 99, right? So if you're getting that as a fasting glucose, it would just be a red flag for me, right? Kind of like, hey, we want to address this. We want to lower the carbohydrate inside of this individual's plan because we're knocking on the door. Okay. Now, speaking of knocking on the door, I would encourage individuals also to test their hemoglobin A1C. So, a hemoglobin A1C is typically a test that's done in diabetics to see how their average blood glucose levels are doing. It measures it because it's measuring how much glucose is actually attached to the red blood cells within the body. Okay. And I would argue, because if we're 5'7", is considered, slightly elevated pre-diabetic stage, and I see a lot of people at 5'5", 5'6". So once again, that's a flag for me that, hey, we can address the diet, lower the carbohydrate in the diet to help lower that number. Because you really want to be down, I would argue 5'2", 5'3", or lower on that hemoglobin A1C to have optimal blood glucose control. Okay, so that's one I like to add into these fives and they're kind of the same thing, whether it be the fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C, two different tests, but also I would add that into the conversation that we're looking at from this standpoint. So optimizing blood glucose levels, anything over 100 fasting, of course, is a red flag. I would say even the 97, 98, 99, we need to look at it, and then the hemoglobin A1C. So if you're 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", we've got some work to do. We need to lower that.
All right, another one, poor cholesterol levels, which I mean, higher levels of the LDL and then the HDL. So I pulled this up right here. So the HDL should be at least 40
Yeah.
for men and 50 for women. And then the LDL, which should be below 100.
Yep. And I think probably the HCL is the biggest one we want to look out there. And this is one that I would say I don't get too caught up in it. If everything is perfect in individuals, let's say you have a 110 LDL, okay, your HDL is above 60, you have 110 LDL. We'll talk about triglycerides. The triglycerides will be the last one that we'll cover, but your triglycerides are 40. Blood pressure is good. A1C is 5.2, probably okay, right? That one little LDL being elevated, because we do see some individuals that just produce more cholesterol. So we'll have these slightly elevated LDLs, and it's not a big risk. But it's the combination that you're mentioning, Montae, when you have a elevated LDL, but then also that HDL is low. Okay. And then I'll put the next kind of tripod in there for that double whammy on the blood work is the triglycerides. So above 150 triglycerides is also known a telltale sign that we're having poor glucose control, poor control inside of the diet, but also the body. Okay. So I would even bring that down to 100. So I like to see triglycerides more like 40 to 80 as optimal, because if we get your blood triglycerides down to 40 to 80, we know that the calories that we're eating is good, but also the amount of carbohydrate. Okay. So making sure that those numbers are within place. Now, if you've got, once again, 3 of these elevated, then you probably have what we're going to term metabolic syndrome, which is going to increase your risk for the chronic disease later on. And I would probably even argue that if you have 3 of these, you probably already have some insulin resistance going on, especially if triglycerides are elevated, along with the cholesterol being kind of messed up, right? So to recap it, 3 out of the five being waist circumference, elevated blood pressure, elevated blood glucose levels, high triglycerides, and then high LDL with low HDL. Now, I added the hemoglobin A1C in there that would go into the elevated blood glucose, just a different test over 3 months versus looking at a snapshot of just a fasting glucose level. All right. So, what do we do, Monte, for individuals that we may think have metabolic syndrome, or we can see their progress photos on the app and we see they carry their weight in their midsection? What are some things that we can change inside of a plan, or what are some general recommendations?
So first and foremost, with the nutrition part of things, like you mentioned earlier, going with the lower carbohydrate approach, making sure to keeping the protein high. So those are the two number one things I'm looking at inside of the nutrition. For training, we're going with resistance training, making sure that they are training with intent. And what I kind of how I describe this to my people is you should be working with a weight where you are, coming up 2 to 3 reps shy of failure or to failure, which failure is going to be to like you cannot do another repetition of it. That is going to make sure that we are, training the muscle with the right intent to get the stimulus that we want on it. And something we've talked about and we've noticed is working with individuals when we do group meetups, and it's nothing against them, but we do group meetups and we work out and see kind of how people train. And I've been there before too, so that's why I said I don't. It's not them. It's just learning the process of it. Is like just not lifting heavy enough, not really pushing ourselves. So just training with the right intent, with the resistance training, and then I mean throwing walking. We have people walk 45 to 60 minutes a day. And I add that in there. And you want me to touch on supplements too, or you want to go into that?
I'll let you, I'll kind of recap that and then you can go into it. And I like it, and once again, we are generally going to say a lower carbohydrate is going to be, less than 100 grams a day if we see that there is a lot of these symptoms and the person hasn't been producing results on maybe 150, 200 grams. But it could be, something that someone is really active and they consume 300, 400 grams of carbs a day. So maybe it's just cutting that in half, dropping them to 200 because it is lower, right? It's a relative lower. And we're not necessarily going to change calories. So maybe it's not a calorie issue that we have with the individual. So we'll bump the fat up for the extra calories, right? From that aspect. The other thing that I would touch on, noting, and I've stolen that from you, and I do one or two in reserve. So instead of two and three, knowing that people just still, I do one or two. So, like, hey, I like that better than perceived effort because a lot of times perceived effort, like maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm stressed. So I'm lifting and it just feels heavy, right? But it feels heavy because I got all this other stress that's going on, if that makes sense. So I like to go instead of using RPE anymore inside of resistance training, going to like what you said, you should only have one or two reps in reserve, or failing. It's okay on the last set, especially if it's a 4 set block. On the fourth set, like if it says 10, like maybe only get 9. I'm okay with that. I would rather have that than most people getting 10. So then we know that they're pushing yourself because that resistance training is going to help change on a cellular level how our body responds to blood glucose and to insulin. So resistance training is so important in helping reverse metabolic syndrome along with the combination of lowering carbohydrates inside of the diet.
Another point on that too with the resistance training that I notice a lot, like with inside of the app, because we can see when people track the weights. A good thing for the listener out there, if you're training and you're using a weight where you can do 3, 4 to 5 sets using the same weight with the same amount of reps, that's usually a sign that we can lift more. Because if you think about it, if you are lifting heavy enough to exhaust the muscle, you shouldn't be able to do 5 sets of the same amount of reps with the same amount of weight.
100%.
So
And
just
that's where a lot of these at-home workouts that are lighter weight or not necessarily lighter, just what you have. It's a lot of reps because you got to do a lot of reps to facilitate the same response if you don't have a heavy load. So that's something to just think about. And but I see it so much because people come in and it is we used to say it was sleep. I mean, I feel like 5 years ago when like everything was going okay with someone on paper, like we try to figure out what's going on with them, and a lot of people were missing the sleep. Now I feel like the trend is the exercise, like because people are doing it, they're just not doing it with the and I hate to say effort because the effort people are giving is good. It's what they think they need to do, but we're trying to redefine it and really put in there, hey, you should only have one or two reps left in the pocket or in the tank in order to facilitate that response we're trying to do.
100%. You threw in sleep. That's another good one though, for sure.
It's still good. I think it goes in trend, especially, what we are speaking on, right? And I think that's a lot to do with our coaching is, if we're hitting on something for a while, like we're going to get people dialed in there, but then it slips over here, right? So
Right.
now you mentioned supplements earlier. Let's hit on I'll hit on the basics 'cause I think especially and maybe and I'll say I don't do a really good job talking about this, but like the foundations I recommend to everybody: omega threes, magnesium, multivitamin, and creatine. All of them to a degree have been shown to help with some insulin resistance and lose body fat. It's just that's not their main thing, right? But we could argue, magnesium, aiding in better sleep is going to help with insulin resistance, right? Decrease cortisol levels. Omega-3 fatty acids decreases inflammation, which one of the main drivers of metabolic syndrome is an increase in inflammation. Okay. Um, And then I want a multivitamin, just cover the basics from there. And then creatine, like more energy to push yourself harder on the resistance training. Therefore, so like I feel like the basics play a big role too in reversing insulin resistance and helping with metabolic syndrome. But we have some more specific ones that we will talk about.
I'm glad you covered those because that's how I was going to start it off. But I mean, for
Stolen.
you look past the baseline supplements, what we call them, the specialty ones. One of the number one things that I recommend is going to be GDA, which is a glucose disposal agent. So I know you recommend that to a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I love GDA. I I don't love the name of it, and I think it was just that is what that product has been called inside of the supplement world. But GDA, glucose disposable agent, right? And it's not disposing of the glucose, right? It's not like we're getting rid of it. What we like to use it for is the active ingredients, especially berberine and zinc. Those things are going to help on the cellular level, allowing the body to metabolize glucose better, right? So we eat carbohydrate, and then all those processes of carbohydrate turning to glucose increasing insulin levels, opening up storage, being able to be stored. That is going to improve secondary to the supplement. Okay. And berberine inside the medical community, a lot of doctors and DOs will use berberine over metformin because metformin can have some side effects with a lot of people. So they find the side effects are less inside of metformin, but the actions or the benefits are the same on both of them. So adding in GDA 2 or 3 times a day with meals can definitely help aid in the process of speeding up the reversal of insulin resistance or quote metabolic syndrome.
I know you mentioned you didn't like the name of it. I think it was like the marketing behind it was the big thing. It's just
It
like,
was.
use this when you have a cheat meal
Yeah.
to help you, to, I'm not going to say, like you said, erase the carbohydrates, but help to utilize those better. So you can't use it for that on occasions, but that's not
Yes.
the main reason we use it.
Yeah, like I mean, we can like short term. Someone's getting into it, like they were in a challenge and maybe they had a vacation, or let's just talk about what's coming up, right? We got Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up. Maybe someone was trying to finish 100-pound weight loss in the year. Then maybe we'd add GDA on. Hey, let's take some GDA before Christmas dinner, right? Like we could use it short term like that too, but also me and you like to use it more as a insulin resistance to help, reverse the insulin resistance. Another one that I like that I've been using and was using it more for fat loss for a while, but it found like some really good numbers, especially decrease in triglycerides and the glucose levels, is L-carnitine. So I like to also look at L-carnitine as a supplement that we could add in too. Once again, if we got some of these symptoms that we're speaking of, inside of metabolic syndrome.
I use that one a lot too. Like for my people, recommend that. I'm
Yeah.
surprised you skipped over Halloween though with the holidays you mentioned. GDA with some Reese eggs.
There's 1 gram of protein in a Reese egg, right? One or two.
I think it's two because for a package with two of them, you get 4 grams of protein. I
Yeah.
think we
Well,
did
I
the
think
math at the time.
here's the reason I skipped over that. I don't get in trouble on Halloween, right? Like, yeah, I'll have a Reese egg or two, but it's not like I don't, for me personally, and this is where like you have to look at emotions and habits and past trends, right? It's the Christmas time that I think gets me more in trouble, right? And I think it's just because that food is there and it just becomes like, one day turns into two. And then I know I preach to people on this. So in the past, I think that is the reason is Christmas has been a little bit tougher for me to stay on point versus Halloween's never really been an issue, right? Like I'll have a couple of Reese's eggs and like move forward. It's good. So
Christmas and Thanksgiving though, you can't waste the leftovers.
I agree, right? So I think that's where that, I can tell you it's been a little bit better since moving to Florida because the weather's much better, so getting movement in has not been an issue, so that's helped me out, the past couple of years for sure. So, but hey, listeners, I encourage you, take a look at some of these numbers that we had. You're more than welcome to email your blood work. I can take a look at it. Once again, I can make some nutritional recommendations from that standpoint. As a dietitian, I cannot recommend any medication or anything like that, but I could definitely look at just your lipid profile panels and glucose numbers and say, hey, Miss Smith, Mr. Smith, you could be at risk of eventually developing some pre-diabetes, diabetes down the road if we don't change some of these habits. Um, and that's our ultimate goal. Once again, just to help educate individuals to make better choices, to live a healthier lifestyle. So, Montae, as always, I appreciate you for your time coming on. We'll get back into the groove of doing these. I'm super excited for our two challenges leading into the fall. So I don't know if this will be out before yours. I know you're starting a group and personally starting next Monday. And
Yep,
then I'm
Monday the
going to,
29th.
yep, the 29th of September. And then I'm going to start a group on Monday's the 3rd. Yep, Monday, November the 3rd. So I'm jumping in for 8 week push, once again through the holidays. And to be it, I love transparency. The reason I'm doing is I got a race in October. So for next month, my focus is on this race I'm doing. And then after that, I want to focus. And I think, for 8 weeks, it's going to be on getting leaner going into the new year. So that if I do well in this race, I can then start building up my volume and racing for next summer. So we're training for next summer's race. There we go. I'll get it right.
Do you have an Ironman this weekend?
I have a half this weekend. Yeah.
I saw your post. I didn't know that. You
Yeah.
just you just like
Yeah.
just wake up one morning and just like, hey, I'm gonna schedule this.
No, I mean we've known it's been on there, but it was just something that is not a priority. We signed up for it last year to do it with Teach, because he wanted to do another one, and then the hurricane came through and it canceled. So, we were going to try to do another one, because we had the full scheduled, and then so we're all right, we'll race another half. We gave me two halves and then the full. Well, we did the full, and I was just like, got back into mountain biking, and then yeah, I haven't been swimming. I have swam once, which is 100% more than I did before Louisville last year, and then I'm gonna get in the water Wednesday, Friday, just to feel comfortable in the water, and it's just gonna be fun.
I was gonna say Louisville, it was coming off of the bicep,
Coming off the bicep, and
swam
once
the
again,
night
like
before
yeah,
in the
and
hotel pool, right?
right, just to fix the goggles. So there's confidence in that I can, all right, Jeremy, you can go, it might be slow, but you can go do a 1.2 mile swim. It's also downriver. So I've got that, like the current with me. So it's not from that standpoint. I am going to try to bike really hard. We rode the other day and conversational pace. Katie and I average about 18 miles an hour on the tri bike. So it's in the shop right now. Brakes were um, not skidding, rubbing. There we go. So the rear brakes were rubbing a little bit. So I'm getting that fixed. But so my goal is 19, 20 miles an hour, on the bike. So I'm going to bike really hard, and then I'll just walk around it, So that's my goal from that standpoint. So I'll put some pressure on me to perform on the bike with certain goals, but there's no pressure on the run or the swim. It's just to have a good time, experience it, and then once again, it's paid for. We're doing it, but it's not a priority. So yeah, got a half this weekend.
Well, last thing I'll say on that is, you live the lifestyle that we preach, and you live it consistently, so you are able to go out and do things like this with minimal training because you live the lifestyle,
Yeah,
which is a good
and I don't
way.
want it, and for people, it's like not, and I try to put that in the text. It's like minimal specific training, because I've been on the bike. I've been biking 100 plus mountain bike or mountain 100 plus mountain bike miles, which I always like to put that out there, because 100 miles on a mountain bike during a week is different than 100 miles on a road bike. Because road bike can cover more mileage in the time, right? So I've been putting the time in, still resistance training, still doing a little bit of functional fitness, CrossFit / high intensity a week. So it's not like there's not been fitness, right? I just haven't been specifically swimming and running or putting that together. So yeah, we'll have a good time. And then, like I said, my ultimate goal is Coldwater, which is a mountain bike race at the end of October. We've got about 5 to 10 people from our team that are running a 15K there. And then hopefully I qualify for Leadville in that race. And then the focus is on finishing the Leadville 100 mountain bike race next August. So that's kind of where my mindset is on my specific training.
Awesome.
All right, brother. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.